Merrills is here. How are the family?
We believe they will be restored.
All right. Pray for Brother Merrills' family for restoration, that they'll be okay, and that everything will go well with them. In the book of Luke, chapter 14, you'll find my text for this morning. And I know some of you are going to say, Reverend, pull that out of context, but I'm going to lift just one verse that starts with "and," or starts with "or." All right. So chapter 14 of Luke's gospel. And for those of you who don't have a Bible, there should be one right in the pew right there near you. And turn to Luke chapter 14. The New Testament is the last third of the Bible or so. And if you find Matthew, then Mark will follow that, and then Luke. And chapter 14, my text for this morning. And I just want to read one little verse, verse 31. And it starts with, or it starts with, or what king going to make war against another king sitteth not down first and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000. You didn't know that was in the Bible, did you? Let me read it one more time, just in case. Or what king going to make war against another king sitteth not down first and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000. That's my text. And I want to use as a subject, I want to tag this text, sufficient for the battle. Sufficient for the battle. We are engaged, my sister and my brother, like never before in spiritual warfare. And I want to say to us loudly and clearly that it is no longer playtime. We've got to take serious our place, our position, and our power in this world, and we have the power to fight back spiritually. Now, the spiritual warfare that we're fighting today emanates from high places. Government structures seem to be against what the church stands for. Economic institutions would ruin us. I was talking to a pastor who persuaded his members that they ought to invest their money in a particular scheme. And I call it a scheme. Well, he didn't call it that, but he persuaded his members to invest their money in a particular scheme in the Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. And they took their money, and now not only have the members lost their money, but the church facility is up for sale. Somebody hoodwinked them. Hoodwink, you know that word? Somebody took them. Somebody got the best of, persuaded them that they ought to, in an economic institution, they ought to put their money there, and they lost it all, including the building of the church. Economic institutions, but also social movements and societal position. They are the reason that we are having to fight such a difficult spiritual warfare. And I remind you, as I did last week, that the enemy is not flesh and blood, but principalities, power, rulers of darkness in high places, spiritual wickedness in high places. Those are the enemies that we're fighting against. It's an uphill fight. But the text penned by Dr. Luke challenges us that before we go to fight, before you enter into the war, Before you struggle against the enemy, sit down first. Now, I know you're in a hurry, but sit down first. Think it through. Thoroughly prepare, and then decide whether what you have is sufficient or not to deal with the enemy. Amen. Some of us are no match for others, no match for one another, and no match for the enemy, and we need to check it out and determine up front whether we have the resources or not. It seems in the text that the crowd had been following Jesus. Come with me now. Come with me now as I give you a little context. It seems that the crowd had been following Jesus for fish and loaves. That was their only reason for following him, it seemed. They wanted to get help. They wanted their rent paid, their utilities paid. They wanted they wanted to spend their money for what they wanted and somebody else's for what they needed. And it seems that that's what was happening in this text. So Jesus looks at them and lifts up 5 things that they ought to consider. And it starts in verse 25 and goes through 33. That's why I could lift this one verse out of context, is because all of these things are listed there in these. The first one is, he says, now listen, if you're really going to follow Jesus, if you're really going to fight in this spiritual battle, you have to remember that your family,
Yes, sir.
your husband, your wife, your sisters, your brothers, are not those that are of your same blood, but rather those that have been washed in the same blood. Verse 26. Verse 27, he says, now listen, if you're going to take up this battle, then you also have to take up your cross. You have to be willing to bear your own burdens in the heat of the day. Verse 27. Verse 28 through 30 said that, listen, if you're going to build a building, make sure you got adequate supplies and resources before you get started. When I first came to Utah, I drove to Ogden early on. They had a new pastor that had come to town, and I got to that little city before you get to Ogden, Riverdale. And off to the side of the freeway was a building that somebody had started to build, a motel that they had started to build. And now they had left it for so long that the wood had turned black. And I said to somebody, I said, now what happened to that building? They said they ran out of money. I was a part of an organization here in Salt Lake City that started building down on 3rd West and 4th South. We started building a building, and the man that was building it for us kept coming back and kept coming back and kept coming back and getting the money until he finally got all we had, and then he left us with no building. And we ran out of money. But he says, now listen, one of the things you want to do is when you're going to build a building, make sure you got enough money. Can I drop just a couple of hints to you? Just a couple of hints. Listen, if you're going to go in the restaurant business, the best advice is that you have enough money when you start to carry you for at least 2 years. If you're going to build a building and you got an estimate of $100,000, make sure you got at least 120, because the change orders will eat you alive. Well, let me hurry on. The 4th thing that he says, now listen, if you're going to follow Jesus and win this spiritual battle, then you have to make sure you got the right relationship with the master and as one of the members of his ambassadorship. And then the last thing, and I rearranged it That's in verse 32. I rearranged it so that verse 31 is my last comment, because that's what I want to talk about. He says the fifth thing that you got to remember is that if you're going to go to battle, if you're going to go to battle and you are a king and you're going to fight against another king, you first sit down and count your soldiers and consult with somebody else whether your 10,000 soldiers is enough to whip 20,000. This sermon is a reminder, my sisters, my brothers, that spiritual warfare is going on, and we must prepare and make sure that we have sufficient resources to overcome the enemy before you start. Two brief things that I want to call to our attention out of this verse that I read. The first one I want to call to our attention is that, listen, don't be in such a hurry to run out and fight that you will fail every time. And the second thing that I want to lift up for you is be fully aware of the numbers that you have, as well as the numbers that they have. Let me take a minute and unpack that for you. Number one, do not be in such a hurry to fight that you fail to prepare before going to war. Hotheads often override reason and wisdom. And we rush into things and into situations that we haven't even thought about. My parents used to caution us, think twice before you act. Use your head and save your behind, excuse me. Put that stuff that's in between your ears and under your hat to work. Think before you act. Sit down and consult first. Now, other people will sit by. If you don't sit down, they'll sit by and watch you. Rush off unprepared, half-cocked, and they know you're going to fall. And when you fall, Sister Smith, they'll mock you and laugh at you when you fail and fall short. But what you really ought to do is ask the critical question right up front. Do I have enough resources? Do your homework. Amen. Do your homework. Do your homework. Ask yourself and your team about the possibilities. Can we succeed? You may be blinded by excitement and adrenaline, and you won't be able to see, but my sisters, my brothers, slow down. A fresh pair of eyes can make all the difference. Invite the opinions and the views of others. And even on this spiritual journey, ask somebody, can Jesus really save? Does he really give the abundant life? Does Jesus in your life really make a difference? In other words, is he sufficient for the battle? And you ought to sit down and think about that. Sit down and think about it. Don't be in such a hurry to rush into battle. You don't know where the enemy is and what the enemy is doing and how they got where they are. So sit down and consult. Isn't that what the text says? But then it says one other thing, and I'm going to hurry to quit. We're going to get out early today. Going to have a little break before you go to Sunday school. Second thing is, make sure you are fully aware of how many you have with you and how many the enemy has with them. In other words, can your 10,000 take on the enemy's 20,000? You outnumbered 2 to 1. Can you handle them? What can you do to even the odds? Your opponent has twice as many resources as you have, and what can you do to even to level the playing field? My good friend is running for president of the United States of America. He's one of the nearly 25 candidates of his particular party, and he's running for president. He's a billionaire. When he announced that he was running, he said he was running because he was rich and I was not. That's what he said. And he has double-digit numbers, according to the best polls, over the next candidate for office. I mean, Donald and I go way back. I mean, listen. I mean, Donald Trump and but he's got what can we do to level the playing field? What are the odds that the other candidates can overcome his double-digit poll lead? He's a billionaire. My friend said, and I'm not even an heir. Before you go to battle, know how many soldiers you had, and know how many the enemy had, and know the capabilities of both yours and the enemy's. We went to war, and Mr. President Obama announced that we won. We went to war and we fought overseas and we dropped bombs and without losing one soldier. And he announced that we had won. Not in numbers, but by the power of his resources. We had bigger airplanes and bigger bombs than the enemy had. You need to think spiritually. Can my 10,000 beat their 20,000? When you sit down and consult, you'll find that it's not always numbers that count. It's not always numbers that make the difference. It's not how many you have that always turns the world upside down. Sometimes just a few is all you need. But you need to know what those few can do. What powers do they have? What authority does those few have? Well, here's the way Jesus said it. Jesus said the downward road to destruction is crowded. And there are all kinds of people on the downward road. They'll always outnumber the upward road. But he said on the upward road, there's a traveler every now and then. And those travelers, he said, will turn the world upside down. Those on the downward road are in the midst of darkness. But those on the inward road are traveling in the light. And light will always overcome darkness. The good will always rise in spite of the fact that along the way, it may not win every battle, but it'll win every war. The good will overcome the evil. Right will ultimately whip wrong. Jesus will outdo and put Satan in his place. So my sisters, my brothers, I've come one more time this morning to invite us that before we go to war against another, that we sit down and consult and ask ourselves the question, have I enough resources in my 10,000 to deal with the enemies, 20,000. You got to sit down, though, and think about it first. The Bible says that God called Elijah one day and said to him, listen, Elijah, tell you what you need to do single-handedly. I'd like you to go out and whip Ahab, Jezebel, 450 false prophets, and 400 prophets of Ashtaroth. That's 852 people single-handedly. And God said to Elijah, you can do it. I just want you to go. Chapter 17 of 1 Kings, chapter 18, same book, you'll find the story of how Elijah was called by God to deal with Ahab and Jezebel and their 850 false prophets. And Elijah got ready to go. And God said to him, don't be in such a hurry. Before you go, come and let me empower you with water from the brook and feed you with meat and bread from the bird. And the book says that Elijah went and sat down by the brook and he drank water from God's brook in the morning and water from God's brook at noon and water from God's brook in the evening. And early in the morning, the bird brought him meat and bread. And late in the afternoon, the birds brought him meat and bread. And in fact, he ate Kentucky Fried and every morning, every afternoon, every evening, the birds brought him. And Elijah got where he was sufficient in and of himself. And he said to himself, it's all right down here by this brook. But can I remind you that if you think about it, when you decide that you are sufficient in and of yourself, your brook is about to dry up. And the bird that's been delivering your pizza is likely to stop flying. And so the brook dried up. By the way, Elijah had prayed before he went down there. Lord, don't let it rain until I pray a second time. And for 2 years and 6 months, it didn't rain. So no wonder the brook dried up, no rain. And then God said to Elijah, but if your brook dry up, and if you're listening to me, then you can go into town and I will prepare a widow woman that doesn't have anything to feed you and give you water. So Elijah went in town and got to the edge of town and saw a lady picking up sticks. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 3, 4, shut the door. 5, 6. She was picking up sticks. And as she picked up the sticks, Elijah said to the ma'am, bring me a piece of bread. And she said to the prophet of God, listen, mister, don't you know it hadn't rained lately? And the crops are not growing, and my barrel of meal is down to 1 handful. And all I got left is a little bit of oil in my cruise. And the reason I'm out here picking up sticks is so that my boy and I can fix a whole cake of bread. Whole cake is, that's an Oklahoma term. I can fix a whole cake of bread, and me and my boy are going to eat it, and listen at what she said, and die. And the man of God said to him, but bring me a piece first. Sit down and think about it first. Talk to God about it first. Put Jesus first. And she turned to go bring him a piece of bread. And he said, oh, by the way, ma'am, bring me some water to drink too. Now, he's been praying that it wouldn't rain. Where's she going to get water from? The brook is dried up. where's she going to get? Bring me a drink of water. And she went and brought him water and bread. He sat at her table, ate and drank, and her boy died. And she said to him, Mister, you done me wrong. You sat at my table and ate my bread and drank my water, and my boy died. Elijah says, let me at him. And he got the boy and restored in him life. And all of a sudden now, Elijah is ready to go to battle against Ahab, Jezebel, and those 850 false prophets, because he has generated enough power. And so he went to battle. He said, here's how we're going to do it. You guys prepare an altar, call on your God, and I'll prepare an altar and call on my God. And whichever God answers by fire, let him be God. And they were crazy enough to say, yes, let him be God. And they called on their God from morning till noon. And Elijah said to him, he's not listening to you. Maybe he's gone to Georgia on vacation. Maybe he's out of town down in St. George. Maybe calling louder. And they called on him all afternoon. And their God, the book says, had ears but couldn't hear, had eyes but couldn't see, had a nose but couldn't smell, had a mouth but couldn't taste, had hands but couldn't feel. Their God was their idol God. And they called on their idol God, and Elijah said, now it's my turn. Y'all tried all day. How about giving me just a little bit at the end of the day? And they gave him a little while at the end of the day. Elijah prepared an altar and said, now, Lord. You look out when one of them old deacons said, now, Lord. Now, Lord, hear me, not for my sake, but for your name's sake. Hear me, Lord, for your name is at stake. Your power is at stake. Hear me, Lord. And the book says that Elijah called on God, and God rained down fire from above. And the fire licked up the sacrifice and the altar. Oh, listen, when you take the time to sit down and consult and then check out your resources, you'll discover that with God on your side, he's more than all the enemies are against you. If you got God on your side, you can win this battle. And so here's what the text says. If a king is going to go to battle, he ought to first sit down and consult and ask the question, can my 10,000 handle the enemy's 20,000? And the answer is that the battle is the Lord's. And if you got him on your side, 10,000 will overcome 20,000. I love the Lord. He heard my cry and pitied every groan. And long as I live and trouble rise, I've decided I'm going to hasten to his throne. Because at his throne, he's got power sufficient enough to handle every enemy. 10,000 can outnumber 20,000. But you got to sit down first and consult. And then you will discover that with God, all things are possible. And I think I told you once or twice before, what God can do cannot be done.